in trying to rebuild bridges with DEC. There are still tensions between individuals, and I think that the way to rebuild those bridges is to continue to operate in a spirit of good faith and continue trying to come together rather than continuous accusations and negativity that has been really making things worse in this regard rather than better.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie, I have a simple question, and that is not pertinent to each individual organisation or entity. But my question is, when was this list circulated to fellow councillors? And I do say that this is a public forum for a debate, but I'd like to know how much notice was each individual councillor provided with these list of expression of interests, please. Can I put that to the acting CEO?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Messina. I'll actually forward that to Mr Martin.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. The list of organisations was discussed at a councillor briefing on the 18th of November, where councillors discussed the 2018-19 appointments and any suggested appointees for 2019-20. The recommendations before Council tonight are in principle. They're based on those discussions at that councillor briefing.
Thank you, Mr Martin.
I have a supplementary question through you, Mayor Rennie. How many alterations were provided in notice prior to this evening's meeting, please?
Thank you. Over to you, Mr Martin, as well.
Just to clarify, in terms of how many alterations
to the actual at the end of the briefing, any changes?
to my
further expressions of interest subject after the conclusion of that meeting.
To my knowledge, none. There was a couple of positions that were there was no expression of interest at that briefing, and the Mayor took it upon herself to make contact with councillors to clarify a few of those.
There were several discussions and several changes prior to this evening.
Thank you. I'll take that question as answered. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? No. There appear to be no further speakers to the amendment.
Question, Mayor Rennie, just because I've been distracted by these questions, but so what point are we at? Are we actually voting on the amendment at the moment, or the substantive?
No, we are on the amendment, and the amendment in front of us is proposed by you and seconded by Councillor Williams. It is an amendment that my name be replaced with your name as the proxy for the MAV. No, DEC. Apologies, thank you. I'm very glad you clarified, so we know. So it is that my name be replaced by your name for DEC. Are there any further speakers to that amendment? No, I'll therefore put that to the vote. All those in favour and against? That motion, that amendment is lost. So we'll...
Madam Mayor, I've got another amendment.
Yes, Councillor Lawrence. I will point out, Councillor Lawrence, that you have had a couple of weeks to express your desire to be on these committees, and so whilst we will hear your amendments...
Madam Mayor, can you withdraw that accusative comment that casts aspersions on my character? And I will give you the 0.41, the 0.51, etc. if you like.
Okay, I'm happy to withdraw it. Okay, please continue with the amendment.
Sorry, just a point of order. In terms of moving amendments, you can only move 2 amendments in a row, and I think Councillor Lawrence has done that.
Thank you. I'll just check the provision of the Governance Local Law.
While you look that up, I'm just proposing that on DEC, my name replace Councillor Surf's name.
Sorry, before you do that, Councillor Lawrence, I will actually, a point of order. I have to deal with the point of order first, Councillor Lawrence. I'm actually obliged to deal first with the point of order.
I'm just getting ahead so that we don't waste time like an hour and a half on points of order.
The advice that I've received, so Councillor Surf, unless you can actually point to a particular clause, the advice I've received is that it is possible for further amendments. Hang on. Yep, okay, thank you. So Councillor Lawrence, section 29.3 of the Governance Local Law states that any one councillor cannot, without leave of the chairperson, move more than 2 amendments in succession. So you have actually moved more than 2. In fact, I think you have moved 3. So I'll rule in favour of the point of order and disallow a further amendment from you.
So, Mayor Rennie, I'm asking you to supply leave because I've been excluded 3 times from just simple committees, and I'm submitting a 4th one. And my understanding, I've been smeared that I haven't raised it before, so I'm asking to replace a councillor
No.
who has only just joined this committee and expressed it in this public meeting. So I'm just trying to see whether there is fair treatment in this chamber.
Councillor Amir, that's out of order. Councillor Lawrence, I'm not going to grant leave. You have already had more than the 2 allowed, so in fact I did allow the 3rd in breach or rather than sticking to the letter of the Governance Local Law. So
I'll just frame it very carefully. I will request that you consider the DDA Act in Victoria and consider equal treatment in regards to inclusion on deck as the Surf has given, and I will refer you again to the DDA Act.
Councillor Lawrence, I've made a decision, thank you. Councillors, we are now back on the motion
Madam
at
Mayor,
8.2.
I would have to move a dissent in the chair. I do not believe that this council should be engaging in processes that discriminate against a person with a disability. I'd move dissent in the chair.
Councillor Lawrence, I don't believe there has been any discrimination, but you would need, if you wish to, I haven't actually, I'm not sure what you're dissenting from, to be honest.
The motion of dissent in the chair would relate to your ruling not to accept a motion for me to replace Councillor Surf in equal manner in that she is
Sorry,
only...
just a point of order.
no,
It doesn't
that's
matter what the
not-
motion is about. It's just the fact that it's a motion. So we don't need any commentary on what the substance of the motion is.
You've asked me a question, I'm interrupted. I'm not sure that there's a factional reason why you haven't...
No, Councillor
bringing
Lawrence.
the meeting to order.
Councillor Lawrence, I'm going to take a moment. It is still not clear to me what you're actually dissenting in. I think you are dissenting from my decision not to grant you leave. Is that correct? That's a yes or no?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, that's Mayor Rennie. I will, I think, allow that, that motion of dissent will go ahead, so I'll invite the Deputy Mayor to come up and take my place. Yep. Thank you for that. Councillor Amir has seconded that. Sorry, apologies. Councillor Williams, Councillor Amir didn't.
Councillor Lawrence, could you please state your reasons for dissent?
Yes, Deputy Mayor Newton. In regards to this process, which is a long list that requires certain discussion, and as we've heard, a vacancy was filled on this night by Councillor Surf. I had wanting to test the capacity of this council to be inclusive politically and had to go through a number of positions to see if the block voting would sustain itself. And I wasn't able to commit to DEC till the final moment of this meeting. But I note that someone without a disability has been able to submit on this night without being ridiculed. I've been subject to imputation by several councillors and by the questions from Councillor Lena Messina that somehow myself nominating for the proxy position of DEC is out of order, has not had due consideration, while another councillor has been able to nominate for exactly the same position. Now, I don't know how many times in this 2 years I have to go through the principles of inclusion in regards to disability. I don't know how many times I have to tell people not to do various actions. But it is obviously within the power of the chair to have considered this nomination for the second position in DEC, and the meeting rules allow the leave to be granted. Instead, what we have got is an exclusionary action, a repeating of block voting that has characterised
10
this council,
seconds.
and an act of discrimination based on disability.
Councillor Rennie, you have the right of reply.
Thank you. I think it's quite inaccurate to paint a picture of anyone being excluded. All of those of us who were at briefings and have subsequently received emails will know that there has been very ample opportunity for councillors to express an interest in any number of committees and advisory positions.
A point of order.
There's
Again,
no
I
point
appear to
of
be
order.
being
Please sit down,
smeared
Councillor
on the
Lawrence.
basis of that statement and targeted
Councillor
again.
Lawrence, please sit down. We're dealing with this point of order.
Well, can you ask the councillor to withdraw the imputation?
We're dealing with this point of order, so please continue, Councillor Rennie.
I'll raise the order again. You need to listen to the words that come out of your mouth. The
Please take a
imputation-
seat. Councillor Lawrence, please take a seat.
As a group, you need to take
Please take a
responsibility.
seat, Councillor Lawrence. We're dealing with this point of order.
I'm
Please
dealing
take
with
a
a point
seat.
of order that this
Councillor
meeting
Lawrence,
rules
please take your seat.
are not permitted to defame another councillor in this meeting. You're doing that again.
Thank you. Councillor Rennie, please resume.
Thank you. The governance local law has provisions around the number of amendments that can be moved to avoid a situation where councillors use.
Another point of order.
Councillor
That
Lawrence.
is a false statement. Can we please have factual statements?
Councillor
The
Lawrence.
meeting rule was read out. It does not say what is permitted or not permitted. It says where's leave can be exercised.
Councillor Lawrence, we've got to deal with the point of order that we're dealing with
We
first.
have meeting rules that say do not defame others. I'm asking that not to occur. We have meeting rules that require accurate information. We're getting inaccurate information and we get defamation statements from the Mayor. Again.
Please take your seat, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Rennie, please continue.
Thank you. I said at the outset in my introductory remarks to this meeting that I would not allow the meeting to be used for grandstanding, and I actually think that's exactly what has happened. And so whilst I could have exercised discretion and allowed.
Point of order, Deputy Mayor. Again, this grandstanding smear is related to a bullying complaint that's been lodged with an external authority. And I would request that smear stop being used. It's been used for 4 months.
Please take your seat, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Rennie, please continue.
Sorry, but I can't just sit here and I've got a point of order. And Councillor Rennie is trying to respond to the dissent in the chair, and Councillor Lawrence is continuing to disrupt the meeting. And so if I was to look at the list of the valid points of order, I would say that it's an act of disorder. And I would like you to make a ruling on that and ask Councillor Lawrence to stop interjecting into Councillor Rennie's comments.
So I agree with Councillor Cerf's point of order. Councillor Lawrence, could you please stop interjecting?
Deputy Mayor, I'll conduct myself in accordance with the meeting rules, and so I can't give you a guarantee if I'm going to be defamed that I'm not going to speak up and raise a point of order. If there's continual breaches of the local law, we'll raise them.
Councillor Lawrence, I've upheld the point of order from Councillor Cerf, so Councillor Rennie has 1 minute more to speak to her right of reply, and I'd like you to respect that. Thank you. Councillor Rennie.
Will that mean that will be a minute without defamation? It would be good.
Councillor Rennie, please resume, and you have 1 minute left.
For the record, I reject the assertion that I have engaged in any act of defamation. The discretion does sit with the chair to allow or not repeated amendments. In the case at hand, amendments were being repeated to make political points and not because there was any great desire, as far as I can see, to join committees, given that ample opportunity had been provided prior to the meeting, in multiple discussions that were held, in emails, and immediately prior to the meeting, where I tried to hold discussions about who would like to be on what committees. So I exercised discretion after 3 amendments were made. I think that's actually very generous, and I think that's probably enough said, and we'd best vote on this.
Thank you. So,
I have a
councillors-
question before I vote.
There's no questions at this point. Sorry, there's no questions at this point, so we're going to deal with the motion
I have
of
a
dissent.
question which I will require
Councillor
answering
Lawrence.
before I can vote, because
Councillor
there was a
Lawrence.
statement made I need to verify.
Councillor Lawrence, there's no questions at this part. We're going to vote on the motion of dissent. So, councillors, we're voting on Councillor Lawrence's motion of the dissent in the chair on the decision not to grant leave. All those in favour and against? That motion is lost. Councillor Rennie, please resume the chair.
Thank you, councillors. I'll just take a minute to confirm that we've now resumed debate on item 8.3 on the substantive motion now before us. We've heard from the mover, Councillor Trent McCarthy, and the seconder, Councillor Steph Amir. Are there any further speakers?
Sorry, just a clarification. I think we're in the middle of an amendment. Oh, no, we're not.
No, a
Because
further
you didn't-
amendment was
Sorry.
disallowed. So there are no amendments currently on the table. I'm asking for speakers. Councillor Messina.
Can I just correct you? Sorry, you said 8.2, 8.3. We're actually up to 8.2.
8.2, thank you. That's what I have on my paper.
Mayor Rennie, I've got a question.
Yes, Councillor Lyons.
Just before we endorse, I think this is the substantive motion we're now at that's had several amendments accepted. Can I just get some information from officers whether there was prior indication of any councillor filling the vacancy that's been so controversial, the second position on deck?
Mr Mann.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, just to repeat my earlier comments, this matter was discussed on the 18th of November, and subsequently the Mayor and I met on a number of the outstanding matters, and there was follow-up with councillors, an email follow-up from councillors as I understand it. That's my level of understanding.
I'll just be more specific on the question. For the second position on deck, was there any communication regarding filling it prior to this meeting?
Okay, thank you. Are there any further speakers on item 8.2? Councillor Lyons.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'd have to speak against the motion.
Certainly. You have 2 minutes.
Look, this is a fairly procedural motion to deal with, and it's not above most people to share power and responsibility in a council. Previously, I've had it raised that because I was took 13 months leave in dribs and drabs over 30 months while I was combating stage 4 lung cancer at a statutory meeting, that I can't fill these positions. Now, I can't support this motion at the point, obviously because it excludes me, but it excludes me from a position that I'm suspicious was only filled in this meeting tonight and not by prior discussion. And then I've been actually procedurally denied a chance to even submit my name for the second position on deck. This is the notion of equality. This is the notion of inclusion that I'm debating. Unfortunately, we have to do it through procedural motions when we're dealing with block voting, but actually it is a simple matter of inclusion as a second councillor on the DEC board. So because we've applied such narrow factionalism in this, I can't support this actual motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Williams.
I too will have to vote against this for reasons that I personally feel that Councillor Lawrence has made a voice this evening that he wanted to be part of, being part of the external committees that this council holds. I think it's important that we include as many councillors as possible, where I feel that we haven't shared that around. And looking at tonight's debate, I feel it is very disappointing that he's been excluded from being on any of these committees. Not 1 year, but this is now 2 years.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lasserf.
I'd like to contribute to the debate. Obviously, there has been much debate about my appointment to the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council. So to clear up the matters, given that I was actually absent from the briefings, I engaged in a conversation with Mayor Rennie about where there might be gaps in external representation to external organisations, and trying to figure out where I might be able to add value, because there was a vacancy, and this happened last week, I think it was, and because no other council had expressed an interest in DEC, I said I'd be happy to...
Point of order, are we hearing or against the motion?
I'm supporting the motion, and I'm saying that I'm very happy to be put forward as one of the representatives to the Darebin Ethnic Communities Council, and I'm looking forward to getting more involved in that organisation. And I would just like to reiterate some of the comments by Councillor McCarthy, who started the debate, in that these organisations are really important organisations in terms of shaping contributing to and shaping some of the big things that we do in our communities. There is the management of our creeks that are on our east and west sides, and I really value the effort of those committees in terms of managing those valuable natural assets. There's things like the Melbourne Transport Forum to make sure that we have a coordinated local government voice on transport, and there are many other opportunities for us to amplify some of our important advocacy work through the MAV, through the Metropolitan Waste and Resource Recovery Group. Councillor Messina has done a really great job over the last 3 years and is heading into a final year there. And these organisations are really important partners to a lot of the work that Council does, and I think that we've lost sight of that a little bit in this debate, and I just would like to draw our attention back to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll ask Councillor McCarthy if you'd like the right of reply.
I'm going to exercise the right of reply, although I feel that Councillor Lasserf probably made the points that I think I probably feel the need to be made, which is that this item should be a cause for celebration, that we have such active and exciting and interesting organisations in our immediate midst, and of course sometimes covering our area and other local government areas. And just looking up there are some organisations there that have a very local focus, such as the Creek organisations. There are also those that have a northern region and a statewide and even a national focus. And I just want to echo the sentiments of Councillor Lasserf and reject any assertions that have been made in the course of this debate. Councillors put their hands up to be involved in these processes and these sorts of organisations because they believe deeply in what those organisations exist to do. And just to pick up on Councillor Lasserf's point, Councillor Messina's role with the Metro Waste Management Group is an example of a councillor taking something and not only doing the work in the meetings of that organisation, but working outside of that organisation. So I find it quite remarkable that the appointment to external organisations in the course of this debate has been cast in what I find a pretty unpleasant ways of framing, to be honest, and I find that a bit disappointing. We're better than that, and I think that the tenor of the debate should certainly be in the direction of celebrating the work of these organisations and also celebrating not just the work of these organisations but the communities that they either come from or exist to support. And I would also note that there are a number of members of our community who are here tonight in the chamber who've been waiting patiently for us to deal with items that they've come along to, and I'd like us to move as quickly as we can now to those other items on the agenda out of respect for them.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. I'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is carried.
Mayor Rennie, can I have that recorded?
You may have your vote recorded. Thank you. Councillor Williams as well. So we'll record that Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Williams voted in opposition to that motion. That brings us to item 8.3, establishment and membership of community advisory committees.
Moved.
That's moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor McCarthy.
Just a question. Have we included Councillor Greco in that recent update?
So Councillor Greco has been included, I think, we'll just check the Darebin Nature Trust.
That's not on there.
And I too would like to make an amendment.
We'll just might actually go back 1 minute and Councillor McCarthy, just make it clear that we know exactly what you've moved because...
So just to be clear, as councillors may not have had a chance to read, under, I think Councillor Lawrence, if I'm correct, is referring to...
On Nature Trust. It was a change. You weren't at the dinner. It was earlier.
So look, what I'll do, I'm going to take this as moved as is on the screen by Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Amir. I think any further discussions we'll manage as...
Can I move an amendment then that the Nature Trust membership is adjusted to the discussions that were held over
So Councillor Lawrence, if you could just wait for 1 second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hear from the mover and the seconder. I'm then going to ask Mr Mann to actually update us on the latest thinking in relation to the Darebin Nature Trust. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Mr Mann to start with an explanation of the latest discussion of where we landed on the Darebin Nature Trust because there's been some shift to timing.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. This report, like the one before it, is appointments for the next period through to the elections next year, and these appointments were discussed at a briefing on the 18th of November. The one since the production of this report, Mayor, the Darebin Nature Trust, there was to be a report going to the 16th of December council meeting to deal with the terms of reference. However, that report will not now go to that meeting. It'll go to a meeting in February. And so thus I have changed the recommendation with regard to the Darebin Nature Trust to the effect that Councillors McCarthy, Councillor Newton and Councillor Greco, who expressed an interest at the briefing, be appointed to the Darebin Nature Trust as I've written in the report up there until the February 2020 council meeting. And a report on the matter will be presented to that meeting, and all the rest is unchanged.
Okay.
Is that okay?
So in fact, Councillor Lawrence, I think that answers your question, although the font is small. So it is actually, those discussions are already captured. So if you see the box that's got the darker font,
yes,
it identifies Councillor Greco is identified there. Okay. So we'll come back to the fact that we have a mover and a seconder for this motion. I will hear now from the mover, Councillor McCarthy.
A foreshadow amendment.
Thank you.
Apart from stating the obvious, which of course is that councillors have had the opportunity to put their names forward to be involved in this range of internal community advisory committees. These committees reflect and represent not everything, but a broad range of council's work, and particularly the pieces of work which in the current context council desires and seeks and in often cases requires either specialist input from members of the community, expert input, or broad community or input by those stakeholders and those individuals who are impacted by council's decisions. And so in some cases, we have community advisory committees, as councillors would see, that represent and reflect the interests of particular demographics within our community or particular groups of people. And in some cases, they're about places, and in some cases, they're about policies. So they're quite diverse, quite broad. I have no issues with the proposed appointments there, and obviously support the recommendation from our officer that we obviously have an interim measure in the context of the Darebin Nature Trust, and to respect the good work that that group is doing in looking at its terms of reference. So I'll end it there, apart from just to say thanks to our officers, and actually a big thanks to the people that actually do voluntarily participate in these committees from a broad range of our community. They are people who care deeply about not just the community at large, but very specific issues, and dedicate and donate a lot of their time, energy, information and networks to make these things really vibrant elements of council's decision-making and consultation.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir.
Thanks. Seconding the words of Councillor McCarthy, and just to add that the list we see here today is the updated list following the review of community engagement that's been happening in recent months, and I know that many of these committees, the officers have been waiting for that review before recruiting new advisory committee members from the community to make sure we've got real breadth in each individual committee as well as across committees. So I look forward to working with those new and ongoing community members, finishing off the work that we've started this term, and hearing new ideas as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Amir.
I'd like to foreshadow amendment.
Well, I've got Councillor Lawrence indicated that he has an amendment, so we'll hear from Councillor Lawrence and then Councillor Williams will come over to you. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I've just got a small amendment that is obviously within the spirit of Councillor Amir's comments of bringing new ideas and fresh energy, and that's just that in relation to the Climate Emergency Darebin Advisory Committee, that my name would replace Councillor McCarthy's as the deputy on that.
Thank you for that amendment. I'll ask if that's acceptable to the mover and the seconder.
No.
No. Okay, so Councillor Lawrence, we will seek a seconder for that. Is there a seconder for Councillor Lawrence's amendment? That's seconded by Councillor Williams, so we'll debate that. Councillor Lawrence, over to you.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this issue. During the course of, I suppose, 41 years of lobbying Conservative ministers about the environment and being involved in renewable energy options, it has occurred to me, looking at this committee, that there is a sameness about the three people included on it, in particular in relation to energy to waste, and also in relation to matters that regard what I call and what other people call just transition. So in that regard, my views on climate change would include a broader breadth than represented by the three people there, who have so far, in what I've briefings with officers here, and also with my readings with submissions in the recent review of the recycling state recycling investigation, that we would at least have one councillor who supported exploring waste to energy options.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
Nothing further to add.
Are there any further speakers to that amendment? No.
Just to note that I would be a new member and I haven't served previously on the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. There are no further speakers to the amendment, so we'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour and against? That amendment is lost. Councillor Williams, you foreshadowed an amendment?
Yeah, there's been no councillors that have been allocated to the Darebin Domestic Animal Management Reference Group. If there was anybody else other than myself who want to be on that, I'm happy to put my name towards that then.
So we'll take that as a nomination. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Is that acceptable to the mover?
Yes.
And the seconder? Yes. So, Councillor Williams, thank you. We will add you as the representative there. So that's through. Councillor Newton.
I'd like to propose an amendment.
Yes.
Just that as Councillor Williams has just nominated for the Domestic Animal Management Reference Group, it'd be great to have a proxy as well. And if you'd like to accept, I'd like to nominate Susan Rennie to be the proxy for that Domestic Animal Management Reference Group.
Thank you for that nomination. Before I accept, I will just actually check with Councillor Lawrence whether he would like to be the proxy on that. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to be the proxy before I accept that?
Yes, certainly. I thought that there was just one councillor on the recommended. Okay, but yes, certainly.
Well, normally there is one proxy. So the Darebin Domestic Animal Management Reference Group. Councillor Newton, are you happy to change your amendment to
Yes,
Councillor
I'm
Lawrence?
happy to nominate Councillor Lawrence to be the proxy.
Okay, thank you. Is that acceptable to the mover?
Yes.
And the seconder? Yes, so thank you for that amendment, Councillor Newton. Councillor Lawrence, thank you for accepting that nomination. Are there any further amendments? No? Okay, we'll return to debate on the motion itself. We've heard from the mover and the seconder. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'd like to speak in favour of this motion, if nothing more than to reinforce and encourage the actual inclusion of me as a proxy on the Darebin Domestic Animal Management Reference Group. This probably marks a high point in inclusion since April this year, when I've faced so much hostility inside this chamber, and I'd like to encourage that behaviour.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers to the motion? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move to item 8.4 on the agenda, which is the proposed sale of discontinued roads. That's moved by Councillor Newton and seconded by Councillor Amir. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Firstly, I'd like to say that I'm really pleased that the officers have managed to put these three in one item. We used to have to do these one by one, and it could be a little bit arduous. I'm not going to take too much time on this. This is basically, it's a really procedural thing where people might have used a road that was discontinued some time ago. They might have been using it for many years. There's three of these where we're now just officially selling it to the people that may have used it before or they may wish to. So it usually is the neighbour. In one of these cases, it's sort of been split into two lots. So there's one going to one neighbour, there's one going to the neighbour on the other side. And this has all been advertised in the leader, etc. So there's not a lot more to add about that.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Amir.
Nothing further to add.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to item 8.5, assistance for reservoir traders. That's moved by Councillor Newton. Is there a seconder?
I have a question before I second.
I've got an indication from Councillor. Was that an indication you wish to second it, Councillor Williams?
Question.
Okay, we'll just take those questions now. So, Councillor Lawrence?
Yeah, Mayor Rennie, I'm just... my question regarding this officer recommendation is that it seems to be in conflict with the actual council resolution. So I just want some answers about that, because the original council resolution was looking at how we could, what tools or options were available in terms of rate relief, etc. And there was a lot discussed, but this recommendation doesn't offer many solutions that were discussed in briefing.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Lawrence. I will refer to the Acting Finance Manager, Michael. Thank you.
Councillors, Madam Mayor, the report makes reference to the constraints that Council faces in regards to this matter and the existing policy provisions that apply. And in particular on page 46 of the report, 46 of the report, we outline some of those constraints. And any changes to the policy should be seen in the context of financial implications, which should be considered as part of the budget deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kelly. Councillor Lawrence, I might ask Councillor Williams, you have a question as well?
Very similar, is that the recommendation says that there was an existing financial hardship policy, but I don't believe that that was really broken down or really explained about what that hardship and those policies that could be followed through. What I read about was that helping traders get more marketing and helping them in other aspects.
Thank you. So I'll seek some answer from Mr Kelly about the existing policy.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the existing policy primarily is focused on residential ratepayers, and it talks about the provisions of rate deferral, not rate waiver or rate rebates. And in this particular matter, the payment arrangement assistance is primarily the focus of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kelly. Are there any further questions before we proceed?
Yes, just before we proceed on this, my question is obviously following up on things that were said in the briefing, so I'm not sure if they're covered by the Local Government Act or what, but in terms of confidentiality, but is there any mechanism for council in the instance of natural disasters, etc., to offer rate waivers or even offer a waiver of the penalty interest rate for a period of time?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Lawrence. I'll refer that once again to Mr Kelly.
Through you, Madam Mayor, in the issue of natural disasters, which would be fire or flood, generally the assistance relates to doing a supplementary valuation on the property, which can result in loss of value, and through that process the ratepayer is given assistance. Thank you.
Okay, Madam Mayor, then I'm happy to wait for a seconder and I'll move an amendment.
Okay, thank you. I'll take that as a foreshadowed amendment and I'll just ask for a seconder. Unless, Councillor Messina, do you have a question? I do. Okay, so Councillor Messina has a question as well.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Generally speaking, a resident and a commercial premises looked at differently. So if I am an owner-occupier of a property that is a commercial premises, I'm aware that I issued a rate notice and therefore I can apply for financial hardship. If I am a renter and a tenant of a commercial premises and the council sends the rate notice to the owner of the premises, how are we assisting, how are we knowing that the term financial difficulty applies to the tenant? What mechanisms are in place, number one? Number two, and how do we know that the trader is in effect going to be compensated, not the owner of the particular of the building itself?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Messina. Mr Kelly, once again.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the primary distinction here is that we're dealing with commercial ratepayer, whether they be the owner or the occupier, and the primary assistance that we're offering is the payment arrangement and the ability to manage the debt over a period with appropriate repayments that the ratepayer can afford, with the imposition of penalty interest applying.
Thank you, Mr Kelly. Councillor Messina?
I have a supplementary question then. So how do we discern who is the ratepayer and who is the tenant?
Mr Kelly?
Through you, Mrs Mayor, the issue about the distinction between the owner and the occupier is an election that is communicated to us by the property owner, and from that point on the rate notice is issued to the occupier if that's the election that the property owner makes and declares. Does that answer your question? Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry, I've been in property rental before, and generally speaking the rate notice goes to the to the owner of the building, and then the owner then passes it on to the tenant, and then the tenant then pays the owner directly or the council itself. Therefore, there's a mechanism that's lost there. What is the auditing process? So if the concession is given to the owner occupier, how are we aware that the trader then gets the concession? Or the assistance as we're claiming on this particular, if we pass the motion? I just want to dot the T's and cross the...
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Mr Kelly.
Sorry. I guess the key principle here is the definition of the ratepayer, whoever that be, and the clauses that we're talking about here tonight are for the benefit of the ratepayer.
Thank you. So, councillors, we have a motion that has been moved by Councillor Newton but not seconded at this point. Is there a seconder for the motion that Councillor Newton has moved?
I have a question.
Okay.
I'm happy to second the motion.
Can I...
We've got a seconder. I'm happy to move an amendment.
So thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I also note that Councillor Williams has a question. So before we hear from the mover and the seconder, we've now got a mover and seconder. We'll hear Councillor Williams's question. Councillor Lawrence, I'll take your amendment as foreshadowed, but we will hear from the mover and the seconder before we get to your amendment. So, Councillor Williams, your question?
My question is that, look, we've got traders who have lost anything up to like 40%, if not more, and many have not taken wages during this time of the Alex RP works. My question is that Alex RP works have occurred in other municipalities, have obviously which would have affected businesses in those municipalities while the level crossing was being upgraded. Are there other businesses that have taken up assistance for those wages that have been lost, whether council or another form that has helped traders?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Williams. Mr Kelly, is that over to you again?
Mayor Rennie, page 47 of the report just makes reference to some of the current practices and the difficulties with having the flexibility. We did some research that one of the Melbourne councils had offered rates assistance, and there was a low level of take-up for that assistance. The details we haven't got to share with you tonight.
Thank you, Mr Kelly. Okay, we'll now move to hear from the mover.
Question through you, Mayor. Any apologies?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Messina.
Is there a Victorian Traders Association or something of that nature, please?
I'm not sure who I should forward that to, but is there a Victorian Traders Association? Ms Olivier?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I'm sorry, not that I don't specifically know the answer to that.
Thank you. Let's hear from the mover and the seconder. So, Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I first wanted to acknowledge that it has been very, very difficult for the traders over the last 6 months with the level crossing closed, and thank you for coming tonight and for letting us know about your concerns. This one's really hard, but something that was really compelling for me with the report was where it said that if we give rate relief, what that might mean is that others might need to pay more to compensate for that. So I do think that this report is good in terms of saying that, you know, there is going to be payment arrangements there if people need it, and that we are doing as much as we can. I think the videos in particular that have been done recently about the traders on Broadway and Urban Street have been fantastic, as well as the bag giveaway, the street trading. So, and I also just want to emphasise that this is a state government project. So while council can do as much as we can, this is a state government issue, and I also note in the report that we haven't had a response yet to the letter from the 6th of November writing to the state government about relief. So I do think that this motion where we're talking about making sure that the traders know about the financial hardship policy provisions and encourages traders to, or affected ratepayers to participate in the ongoing intensive marketing program, I do think this is appropriate for our level of government.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
I'm going to withhold my speaking rights for the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lawrence, you indicated you had an amendment.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. I have a point 3 to add, which is simply that officers report back to council in the new year regarding options for a supplementary valuation of affected properties, and also a report on the capacity to give interest waivers.
Thank you. We'll just make sure that the officers have captured that. Councillor Lawrence, I think we've got that up on the screen. Can we get you to just read it and confirm that those were your words, or it meets your intention? Pardon?
I'm going to say no to that.
Okay, so Councillor Newton has indicated that's not acceptable, so we'll seek a seconder for that amendment. Councillor Williams, thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Okay, speaking to the amendment. Now, this, we seem to have got diverted off the track of the previous council motion that was seeking options of how to help. I wasn't seeking excuses of how not to do anything. So it's a very different intent from the motion, and if I was moving it as an amendment, it'd be disallowed under our local government law. So if I was a councillor responding to the previous motion, I would be disallowed. What we're actually talking about is trading conditions were changed for so long that the actual value of the properties as commercial entities was altered. We are land tax collectors on the basis of net annual value, which is not just about the capital cost of the property, but the potential earnings of it. That notionally has NAV in it. So what that means is if your trade dropped by 40%, you've actually altered the value of that commercial property. Now, generally, all the commercial arrangements in terms of leasing require the outgoings to be paid by the tenants. So what I'm asking for is to get back on track and come back with some practical options which have been foreshadowed and mentioned by officers here, that a supplementary valuation during the period of that closure of the intersection and the loss of traffic would actually give a rate reduction for that period. Now, we do supplementary valuations all the time in this city, and in fact, it's up between 1 million and 1.5 million every year is added to our rates because people improve their properties. So it's not right to conclude that there isn't flows and balances. Now, obviously, trading conditions are very high in Northcote and Westgarth, as documented by the Leader newspaper. But this particular part of the city is affected by the downturn because of the high number of people on limited incomes and the high number of people on partial incomes. Added in the actual level crossing, which destroyed the shopping centre as a one-stop destination because the barrier of the railway crossing meant you couldn't go to an ATM on that side, you couldn't go to a shop on that side. It destroys the shopping experience. Actually, a lot of people went to Summerhill instead. So if we actually looked at doing a supplementary valuation for part or whole of that year, we may be able to actually deliver some rate relief, number one. Now, more generally, some businesses are going to go bankrupt this year, and that means they're not going to have income, and we should waiver the interest and let those people sell their businesses and not have the burden of our council interest on top of the tragedy of actually going bankrupt.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
I couldn't even fathom what our traders have gone through. I mean, this is a very small proportion that have come tonight in our gallery, and thank you for coming. But the mental stress that this must have caused of this financial loss to them, it would be phenomenal, not just to them personally, but it's a rippling effect for their whole families. Sorry. It's this council, we owe it to our businesses in our area. Council not only makes up sporting clubs and residents, but it's also the businesses that is the heart of Darebin. And it's important that which many of those businesses have family that work with them, they have other workers that work with their employees, and they also live in the area. So they not only have businesses, but they also have houses and they live in the area. I think it's paramount that we need to start looking things in a very different direction, especially when situations that are one-off that occur. It's not like that we're going to have the railway crossing occurring every couple of years. And I think we need to look at this with a new lens and see how we can do things in different ways. We are here tonight and we can make changes. It's up to us to make those changes.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor Messina.
I think we need to get some bearings on rates, and the calculations of a rate on a property is not deemed by how much income you're generating on that particular business. So let's get that clear. Number two, I understand that there has been some financial hardships, and I could see it. A couple of times a week, I live on the other side of the municipality. I drive right round to get to Dean Martina's coffee. So if I have to go to a destination, I go there, regardless of which route I have to go to. If I need to go there, if there's no direct route, I'll go right around. Having said that, I understand the hardships that are happening. To run a business is stressful enough. To have that extra layer of not being able to have your traders or you're having your street coming to your front door and reducing your income is very stressful. Not only has it been going for a short period of time, it is going for a longer period of time. But let's understand one thing. There is a Victorian Retail Traders Association, and it is up to them. I have seen nothing that actually collectively puts through any of the hardship that have gone through any other traders in the statewide, where the 30 level crossing removals, there's no claim that's gone through any of them through the state government, and I wonder why. This is something that the state government should be addressing. It has not addressed it, so let's make that clear. It is something that council has put on council table, but it is something that the state government should be addressing, and they are not addressing it. However, we are asking this to come here, and we are addressing it as best we can. The I Love Reservoir campaign has done tremendous efforts in terms of putting together the light of the traders that some of them I didn't even know existed in some of the smaller businesses. So I think that's been very successful. And I think what we need to understand is that this is not something that we have control over. And it is something that that is a myth, like, you know,
That's
many
time.
myths that are coming around. So I think that needs to be clear.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? No?
I just have a question.
Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
I just missed the last words of Councillor Messina's comment. Was that myth or Smith? What was the last words?
It was myth.
Thank you. So, there are no further speakers. I'll just ask the gallery to refrain from comment. There are no further speakers. I'll therefore put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour and against? That amendment is lost. So we'll return to debate on the motion. We've heard from the mover, Councillor Newton, and the seconder, Councillor McCarthy. Are there further speakers?
You haven't heard from me.
We haven't. Thank you. You reserved your right. Councillor Lyons.
Then you have something to respond to. Look, I'm going to speak against this motion because it's simply a more of this blocking, not looking for solutions for a part of our community that's in extreme hardship. Now, the amendment I put up that could have at least looked at another option is for us to get information to know what a supplementary rate would look like on these two streets. Now, what we're seeing here is a shocking exercise in poor governance because we were not seeking the information to help our residents or our businesses. It's a very anti-business, anti-reservoir consideration to even reject the notion of finding out whether a supplementary valuation could provide some relief to people, or, in fact, whether a waiver on interest will assist people who may be going out of business. The reason I say that is because the rate debt itself can build up in the other bills that aren't paid and the rents that's not paid, and it ends up a big mess at the end. So we're actually compounding that, I think, with an 11 or 9% interest rate. So then we could at least get out of people's lives and not be punishing them, some will go under with up to 80% loss in turnover. So the current motion is a do-nothing motion. It's callous. It is at the heart of this, again, this postcode war against reservoir that I find disgusting.
Point of order.
And it is...
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, please take a seat. Someone's raised a point of order. Councillor
Yes,
Newton,
can
can
I
you
have
refer to the governance local law?
Yes, 47E is offensive, saying that it's callous and anti-reservoir. I find offensive.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, you've heard that.
Happy to replace the words with calculated indifference. But it is a calculated indifference, and I've lost some of my time.
We'll get back to the time. Councillor Lawrence, I think...
So I've withdrawn the words mentioned, and I'm continuing to speak.
Okay.
So it is calculated indifference to not understand that, unlike other parts of the city, this part is finding a double downturn.
10 seconds.
And to actually not even consider what mechanisms are within our power to offer some relief. And again...
Thank you, that's time.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Are there any further speakers?
Yeah, I do.
Councillor Williams.
I too will have to vote against it. To me, I feel we haven't explored all options. I couldn't think of anything worse. I feel like it's a sick dog that you take to the vet and the vet says, I'm sorry, we'll have to put your dog down, without going into any further investigations if there's anything that they could do to keep the dog alive. I feel you're not giving me any other options but what's up there, and I don't feel comfortable with making a decision on that. Sorry. I beg your pardon?
Sorry, Councillor Messina, you've interrupted Councillor Williams. We'll just make sure...
Point of order, can we have the words "Ask Robin Scott" withdrawn by the councillor?
Sorry, I'll withdraw those comments.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. I didn't actually hear what you'd said, but that was out of line. So thank you for withdrawing those words. Councillor Williams, please continue.
As a councillor, I feel that when we make decisions because we have a full report or feedback or a full breakdown. And I feel that we haven't in this particular case. Therefore, I don't feel comfortable in voting for this.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy, you reserved your right to speak. Would you like to exercise it now?
Yeah, just briefly, I really appreciate the challenge that this debate brings to councillors who want to be seen to be doing everything that they can to support traders. And having experienced this now in a couple of the shopping strips in Rucker Ward, particularly Fairfield, where we saw an entire section of our trading area basically cut off from customers for a considerable period of time due to works that were both public works and private works. I can totally sympathise where councillors may be coming from in terms of wanting to work out what we can do in relation to every point here. There are some pretty significant limitations about what council can do, and I think we need to be very clear that the report goes through the work that council's business unit is doing, some excellent work in really trying to bring public members and customers to Reservoir despite the works that have been undertaken. This is the reality. The reality is that this is a state government project. We are advocating to the state government, and I see councillors nodding, and I think the reality is that if traders actually want to see that sort of responsiveness from state government that they've seen from council in relation to really supporting the economic development piece. They have my complete and total backing. The problem that we have here is that it is state legislation that dictates the way in which rates are collected and the way in which rates are managed. Once again, is a state element. So we are in a difficult situation. The report is quite detailed in terms of what council can and can't do. And on the basis of what we have in front of us, I think we've got the best way forward. So I'm prepared to support the recommendation as it currently stands.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton, would you like to exercise the right of reply?
No, I reserve my right.
Thank you. We'll now put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? Thank you. That motion is carried. Would you like your vote noted?
Can I have my vote noted in the negative?
Absolutely. Councillor Williams as well. Thank you. So we'll note that Councillor Lawrence and Williams voted in the negative. That brings us to item 8.6, the Bundoora Homestead Arts Centre Board of Management report. It's moved by Councillor Newton and seconded by Councillor Amir. We'll just take a minute while people leave. Councillor Newton, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So we are here to approve the Bundoora Homestead Arts Centre annual report. I'm very fortunate to be on the committee of this board. It's an excellent board and it's an excellent curatorial team and staff team there. I think what's really exciting about the Bundoora Homestead Arts Centre is that we're seeing the impact of the investment of funds that we put in 2017 to increase their staff numbers, increase what they're able to do. And we're now seeing the results. We're seeing the results in terms of the audience numbers going up. We're seeing this really incredible range of art exhibitions. Every time I go there, I'm so impressed by the quality of the work. The last time I was there was for the Darabin Art Prize, where I think there was something like over at least a few hundred entries. And I'm just always impressed by the continuous improvement, and I think this annual report really shows that.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Amir.
It's great to see all the wonderful work happening at Bundoora Homestead summarised in the report. I enjoy visiting, but it's always good to see just the sheer volume of work summarised in a few pages. I was really excited to hear about the success of the Craft Lab Plus programs, which was oversubscribed, 9 major exhibitions, over 14,000 visitors. It's such a wonderful mix of history and art at Bundoora Homestead, and really an interesting place to have the focus both on that historical conservation as well as some really progressive and challenging exhibitions, including Lucky and Dapper in the last year. And I want to extend my thanks to the management committee, the staff, the volunteers, and everyone who's worked so hard over the last year.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Are there any further speakers? Being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to item 8.7, the East Preston Community Centre governance. It's moved by Councillor Amir and seconded by Councillor Lassurf. Councillor Amir.
So this report proposes that we have a transition approach to having a lead tenant managing the East Preston Community Centre. So the Community Centre opened several years ago in response to an identified need for more community infrastructure in that area. It's really great to see in this report that the programming that's happened over the last few years has been so well received, and that the community centre is so well valued by the local community. In thinking about this challenge, it is something that I have thought about and considered there are both strengths and challenges in both models of having ongoing management by council or having a lead tenant model. But the strength of having a lead tenant means that we can leverage the knowledge and leverage the networks and corporate memory and all those other benefits of not one but two organisations. So that's really exciting to be able to have that potential, and I look forward to seeing who we'll be working with in the coming years.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Lassurf.
Just to add to Councillor Amir's comments, this community centre is in its infancy, and I think that this transition needs to be carefully managed, and I'm really pleased that there is a 3-year plan in place to manage that transition. I'm really excited, though, that what's been proposed is to transition to a community managed environment. Like a neighbourhood house. We know all neighbourhood houses are different because they're there to serve the communities in which they are located, and I think that establishing a committee of management around a centre like that will bring, I guess, a new voice from the community, giving greater agency to that local community. And as Councillor Amir said, it will allow us to leverage alternative funding sources on top of Council's continued commitment to provide funding to the centre, and really tap into the vibrant Northeast Neighbourhood House network that operates in Darebin, and it includes all of Darebin's neighbourhood houses. We have a strong neighbourhood house sector here in Darebin, and I think this will only enhance that.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? No, I'll put this to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to 8.8.
I'll move that.
That's moved by Councillor Lawrence and seconded by Councillor Williams. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, look, I rise to support this motion, which is going to create a terrific bike environment through Kazali Ward. And I know a number of people who live over near Elizabeth Street and some former residents of that area who look to a greater pedestrianisation and also greater bike links down there. That actual area then quickly links up, obviously, with Darebin Creek and also cuts you right through to Coburg Lake. So the enhancement of this in terms of leisure cycling really means that we're linking up not just with our own creeks for bike users, but we're also linking up to the man-made asset of the Coburg Lake and those surroundings there. So this is going to be terrific work, and yes, I know many people who are going to be happy to see it.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
I think this is a wonderful initiative that Council's taking up. What it will do, it will increase comfort and safety for those who are choosing to walk, wheel and ride and take transport. The whole point of this project is actually showing connections, showing where places that people can easily go to, whether it's certain transport, where's that transport can take them. So it links them from one place to another, from getting from A to B, C, and then back to A again, the quickest way. The most impressive thing about this is that I find not only with what the plan will show, it will actually give opportunities to create places of like small pocket parks and achieve both what is safe for safe travel and open space goals. But the most exciting thing I find is that anybody who gets in a car or anywhere, you put your GPS on and it takes you to the most quickest way to where your destination, and where there's any red spots, you obviously know there's a bank up of traffic. With this, it actually will do that for a person who doesn't have that GPS. And what it will do, it would particularly help those who have high anxiety and they can pre-plan their trip well in advance beforehand, and they can see easily where they're going and what links they need to take to get to their destination. So it's I very much look forward to the obviously this is the draft plan, so I very much look forward to the final draft that comes back to Council to be endorsed, and look forward to seeing all the links that will pop up on that new plan. And yeah, it's good that we're looking out for the most disadvantaged in our community, especially those who are struggling with mental health and stress.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Through you, Marini. This project is streets for the people, by the people, and their input is valuable. When we first came together as council term, in our council term, we wanted a well-connected city. We are expecting 50,000 people, extra 50,000 people in the city, the municipality of Darebin, the majority coming into the Gazaley ward, and this is the paper to come into that fruition so that there is north to south, east to west connectivity. I'm particularly intrigued with the Kramer Street and the Jessie Street connection. I've not seen one, and I understand the only one that is in existence is in South Melbourne, so I'm interested in to see how that actually works. I am not a bike rider, I'm an internal bike rider, but having this, I do that at the gym. So if I was to have this particular space where I was going from north to south, east to west, I feel safer on the streets, and that's what the community need. This is the future of what's going to happen in inner city Melbourne. It will happen, it's just a matter of when it's going to happen, so I look forward to this particular project.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Any further speakers? I'll put that to the I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. So we'll go to item 8.9.
Move that, Mayor, but with an amended motion.
Okay, so Councillor McCarthy is going to move 8.9, an alternate motion, so we'll make sure that we get that up before I get a seconder. So, Councillor McCarthy, can I just get you to check that that's the motion?
Yes, and also just to note that the date of 1 January 2023 doesn't need to be blued. It's just
It's just a date
of my email. So.
Okay, thank you. So that motion has been moved by Councillor McCarthy. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lyons?
A question. I've got an amended motion here. It's different to that. The two things.
It is. So Councillor McCarthy has put up this motion as the one he would like to move. Would you like me to seek clarification from the officer as to the difference, Councillor Lyons?
Yes.
Yes. So I might go to Ms Olivier just to comment on the difference between the two.
Okay. So, councillors, the difference between the two, so the one that's in front of you as an amended officer recommendation and the one that's on screen, which has been moved by the councillor, is in item 6, bullet point 2. Essentially, officer recommendation deleted a point from your papers. The recommendation, the motion on screen has replaced that point with a different point.
I can also just add that bullet point 2 was a repeat of bullet point 1. That also that in bullet point 1, the addition of the words new jobs. And just...
Okay. Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Lyons. I hope that answers your question. Is there a seconder for the motion?
I've just got a supplementary question.
Okay, Councillor Messina has seconded, but I'll go to your supplementary question, Councillor Lyons.
Look, I've sort of had my head in the recycling report all day, but I'm just, and I appreciate the symbolism of council making callings on the federal government, but how does these targets relate to our operational targets, just for the sake of integrity, credibility?
Thank you for that question. I'll refer that to Ms Levy or Ms Moxham.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. Certainly the report outlines on each of those areas what Council is currently doing to progress towards them. I haven't specifically checked the alignment of those targets at this point. Broadly, Council has a strong policy position already that is consistent with these specifics.
Thank you.
So just a supplementary on that, because obviously to support this motion, I understand it's symbolic, but still would be good if our target is 100% renewable at 2030 for the council operation. Is that correct?
So Councillor Lawrence's question is Council's target equally ambitious in relation to 100% renewable for council operations by 2030?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, Council has an adopted position through its climate emergency plan of 2017 to achieve zero net emissions by 2020.
2020.
This is council operations by 2020, and it's retrospective after the calendar year. So it would see 100% renewable energy through its commitment to the electricity power purchasing agreement, and then it would seek to offset its remaining emissions through offsets.
So just a supplementary on that, is it consistent with our target for the Darebin community?
Thank you. Are you able to comment on our target for the Darebin community?
Through you, Mayor Rennie. The target in the current council plan is actually about this council plan period. Beyond that, council has a strong, policy commitment to addressing the climate emergency at the speed that is required.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, do you have further questions?
I've just got a technical question in regard to 100% renewable 2030 in Victoria. Is that achievable with the 2048 closure of Loy Yang 1 and 2?
Thank you. I'll just refer that to the officers. They might take a minute to work out who's going to answer.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, my assessment of current policy settings is that this wouldn't be achieved with a whole range of current policy settings at different state and federal government levels, probably including the treatment of the electricity settings at the moment.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go now to the mover, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you also to our officers for all the work that they've put into this, and also I'd like to thank members of Climate Emergency Darebin, as well as the hardworking local climate activists from Darebin Climate Action Now and various other groups. And I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions to what we have in front of us here, which is not only, I suppose, a pathway for the next stage of our advocacy, but also the pathway for us to build stronger links, stronger connections, greater collaboration with cities all around the world, particularly here in Australia and also here in Victoria. And also I just want to thank the input and contributions that we've received from some of our climate activists and climate action groups as well in relation to these points. Everything that has come through will be fed through to our officers for consideration. Many of the contributions that we've received in the consultation process, and I'd acknowledge 2 of our DCAN members here tonight, actually already in existing policy positions. What we are wanting to do is recognise that this is the 3rd anniversary this Thursday, the 5th of December, of Darebin becoming the first city in the world to declare a climate emergency. And I can't underestimate how important that is, because it unleashed, following significant community activism over the previous decade, it unleashed a wave of declarations across the planet. As the latest figure that I just checked here was 1,212 governments around the world that have declared a climate emergency, of which, across 28 countries, of which 76 are in Australia. And so we're enormously proud of that, but we also know that we constantly need to move beyond the declarations. The declarations are the first point telling the truth, setting the expectation, applying the framework. It's the action that follows that is going to make the great difference. It's a particularly special anniversary for me as well, because it's my daughter's 7th birthday on when we made the declaration, so she's turning 10 on Thursday, and I have to say that I now measure all of the planet's climate achievements based on her birthdays and where we are. And I'm saddened, in fact, to report that whilst the city's movement and the local movement and the climate activist movement, Extinction Rebellion and Student Strikers have done enormous work to elevate climate emergency, and the climate emergency is the #1 word in the Oxford Dictionary. We are yet to see the significant action that this report speaks about and that is so desperately required. So this report takes us to that next stage. It progresses the establishment of Climate Emergency Australia, which is the national network of local governments. It also sets in train mobilisation activities, which I'm sure other councillors can talk about. And importantly, it elevates our commitment, our declaration, to that next level, which is that in order for us to do what must be done, we must work together, we must work in partnership, in collaboration with other cities, organisations, citizens and groups, because time is running out.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. I just want to echo what Councillor McCarthy says, but climate emergency means different things to different people. For me, it means evolution of this human race and evolution of our particular planet. I'm proud to say that Italy actually declared that it is essential through all education streams to talk about climate emergency. So I'm very proud of my Mother Earth. I want to focus on a couple of things, and that is that in particular, I'd like to talk about planning, and I'd like to talk about products and packaging sold in Australia. Currently, product stewardship is not mandatory in Australia, so it is only voluntary. So I'd like to see by 2030 that if we haven't put in compulsory stewardship in terms of recycled materials by default, we are going to be in trouble. Where else is our product going to go? It's going to go to landfill unless we put some measures in place. So it needs to be mandatory, not voluntary as it currently stands. In terms of planning and construction, I'd like to say that I looked at some plans just the other week where a carbon neutral plan actually appeared on my office. And in particular, we looked at Tesla batteries in a residential property where they were looking at putting that in place. Also looking at railing, when we looked at railing on a rooftop garden to have solar panels that will be having the home actually fully sustainable, which these innovations and these plans are innovation plans and entrepreneurship that actually looks at a different lens. And this is what we need to do. If we're going to be fair income about, and I use that word, to have it make a statement, and actually we need plans in place to complete our goal, and that's what this nation needs to do. So I'm happy to endorse and second this particular motion.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Further speakers? Councillor Lasserre.
I'd like to propose an amendment. Hang on, I did have it in front of me. So to the last dot point, I'd like to change it slightly. So invest in the infrastructure to support the transition to all electric cars, buses and trucks by 2025, and support the local manufacturing of all types of road transport vehicles.
Yeah, happy to accept that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lasserre. That's been accepted by the mover and seconder. So as soon as we've got the words on the screen, we'll just... Support local manufacturing of all types of road transport vehicles. Thank you. Are there further speakers to the motion? Councillor Lyons.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I think this is a pretty serious topic for places like Latrobe Valley, who are fellow councillors on the MAV. I'm speaking in favour of the motion because the time is late, but I think what we're still lacking is the word just transition in the final words. And the reason is the goals that we were setting for our own organisations in terms of 2020 are admirable and achievable, we believe. But the goals for parts of Victoria where the coal plants are still running, energy plants are still running, are constrained by a number of factors in Victoria. Now, obviously, with Australia, well, we've still got denialist government, so everything's kind of not possible in Canberra. But those communities are on the MAV with us, and in terms of a just transition, we're yet to see in Australia the kind of just transition for coal areas that was embarked in Germany. Perhaps I'm suggesting this is an amendment that the word just should be in front of transition, but I don't want to go to the vote. Been to enough votes. And the point there is that for those communities in Latrobe Valley, and actually for the government, which must consider this matter in March in terms of reporting back in their own requirements for their targets for 2025 and 2030. We currently have a long-term state government target of renewables by 2050. We're lagging behind, obviously, Europe. But both in Spain and obviously in Germany and other places, there's been billions and billions of dollars of transition to create local jobs. The electric cars mentioned, of course,
That's time. Thank you.
are one way. But I think we need to actually work within the MAV membership.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Messina?
Question through you, Mayor Rennie. Products, would that cover roads and footpaths?
I'll just hand over to Ms Olivia for that one.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. That wasn't what was imagined when that was drafted, so we were imagining consumer products that you might buy in a store.
Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, as a seconder of this motion, am I able to make an amendment?
No, you're not.
Or
Thank you. Are there any further speakers?
I'll just move an amendment in that regard to the comment. Councillor
Yes,
Messina.
and the amendment would be?
The amendment's two-part amendment. One, that in the final dot point before the word transition, we include just transition.
In the last dot point.
Yep.
We'll deal with this separately then. I'll just ask if the word just is acceptable.
support the just transition.
Sorry, I think the word's being misapplied in the context.
Councillor Lawrence, I tend to, just so that we get this right, you're talking about a just transition in energy. The last dot point relates just to the transition of vehicles. So,
Yes, it's a very important point from my point of view, and it supplements the final addition, which talks about local manufacturing of cars. It re-emphasises that.
okay, we'll just take it as it is and ask the mover and the seconder if they support that.
I just seek some clarity from our officers, because I don't want to do a Frankenstein job on a motion that's had quite a bit of work done to it. So I'm just wanting to understand how officers would interpret that, the introduction of the word just.
Frankenstein.
Councillor McCarthy, can you withdraw the word?
I'm happy to
Frankenstein?
withdraw that, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm back
Thanks.
in the dead, but not Frankenstein.
So can I get some clarification from the officers?
I would interpret just transition as seeking a transition that incorporates social equity and seeks to be fair.
In that case, I'm happy to include it.
Okay, and the seconder? Yep. So, Councillor Lawrence, we've dealt with the first of your amendments. That's been accepted.
Okay, the second amendment requires all roads and footpaths to be made from recyclable content.
Requires all roads and footpaths to be made from recyclable or recycled. Recycled.
Content.
No, I think that's an additional dot point. So is that acceptable to the mover and seconder?
As a dot point, rather.
Yeah, we'll get that.
Can I just ask, just so that we're consistent, because this becomes a public position of council, that we get the words right? They just need to be consistent with the previous dot point, fully recycled materials or fully recycled content. I'd ask officers to contribute if I can.
Okay, I'll just get some input from Ms Olivia and Ms Moxham.
Look, my view is that that's clear and in the context of an advocacy ask. Yeah.
In that case, I'm happy to accept it.
Okay, and Councillor Messina? Yes, so thank you, Councillor Lawrence, for those amendments. Are there any further speakers to the motion? Councillor Lasserf.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I can't believe it's been 3 years since we first declared a climate emergency. A lot has happened since then, as Councillor McCarthy covered in his comments. I don't even know how many councils or levels of government now that have declared, because every time I go up there on the website, the number moves up, which is really pleasing to see. But that does mean that we're building momentum, but unfortunately that hasn't seen a resultant shift in the level of action that we need to address the climate emergency. I welcome, the consolidation of some of our key policy positions in terms of transitioning to zero emissions by 2030, and in particular, to Councillor Lawrence's point, to 100% renewable energy and the need to make sure that we learn some of the lessons from the transition in Germany to make sure that no one gets left behind in terms of their job and their livelihoods, because that is a really important part of this. But that does mean that we will need the early closure of coal plants to be brought forward to meet the emissions reduction that we need to achieve to make sure that we have a safe climate. I'm also really pleased to see that we've worked out a way through Climate Emergency Australia to bring together some of the leading voices to be able to collaborate, to be able to advocate in a collective way through a partnership with NAGA. NAGA has a real strong track record in doing this type of work, and I think this is a really good place for it to form, take some shape before hopefully it becomes much wider than NAGA. And I guess in closing, there is so much work to do, and there was a quote that I heard recently. In terms of climate action, no one is doing more than cities, but no one is doing enough. And I think that really sums up the position that we're in. And I guess I'd like to renew our calls to state and federal government in terms of them lifting their games as well.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. We'll make sure that's noted as unanimous. Thank you. We will now move to item 8.10, Council submission to the Ministerial Advisory Committee for Planning Mechanisms for Affordable Housing. That's moved by Councillor McCarthy and seconded Councillor Newton.
I just have a...
Councillor Lawrence, we'll hear from the mover and the seconder, and then we'll come straight to you for the amendment. So Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, in rising to speak to this, I don't profess for a moment to suggest that what we put in our submission to a Ministerial Advisory Committee is going to deliver what is required. And I'm just being really frank here. And I say this from the position of constant and perpetual disappointment in this policy space. After talking in this chamber in 2010 when we launched our Affordable Housing Action Plan, and we launched that down at the Home Street estate with our public housing tenants, highly vulnerable people who were at constant fear of losing their homes and losing that safe place to live. Because what we have seen in this space over the past decade is anything from policy inertia to a complete policy disaster. And so when we talk about the mechanisms that exist in the planning scheme, We have had a few almost ran moments where ministers have said, yes, Darebin, we hear you, we will look at inclusionary zoning, we'll give you the chance to be a pilot site, and nothing happens. We've had the attempts, including positioning some of the developments in our city to have a mandatory 15% social housing component or a public housing component, and we've had red dot decisions at VCAT. We've been wrapped over the knuckles for overstepping our powers. So in supporting the recommendation and supporting particularly the two key points here in relation to which we would be writing to the Minister for Planning and Housing, which of course is the mandatory controls for affordable housing in the planning scheme and the engagement with councils in relation to planning for affordable housing. I hope that we can reposition this dialogue. I have to say I am not confident because consistently governments have failed to understand that this is an issue that is bigger than any political term. And if you look at the great public housing and social housing building programs of the past, they were delivered with a view that the people who positioned and fought for them would never actually see the full benefit of their work, and that is the kind of political bravery that we require on this issue. So I'm sure other councillors will wish to weigh in relation to this, but we need to see policy change, and this is one more mechanism for us to make that case. And of course, the position that we've advocated for so strongly for so long, inclusionary zoning, I think is well supported by our community. I've had this consistently spoken to me in people in the wealthiest parts of Darebin who say, I don't want this to become a place where people on low incomes can no longer live. That's not why I came here. And I think that our representation in this regard reflects that desire for social equity and inclusion and constant advocacy on this topic, and I'll end it there.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I also really wholeheartedly support this proposal. I was at the East Reservoir Neighbours for Change meeting last week where they had a person who spoke about their lived experience of homelessness when they left a partner, and we also heard from Moss about the work with assertive outreach that they're doing. And this was at the East Reservoir Senior Citizen Centre. This is one of the areas of Darebin where there are a lot of pockets of disadvantage, and the people at that meeting, some of them live in public housing, some of them are doing it really tough themselves, but they also know that it's getting harder and harder for their neighbours, and they wanted to find out what they could do. We know that there's basically no affordable housing in Darebin now, which is absolutely terrible. We know that we're seeing more rough sleepers, we're seeing more people in transitional housing, and we also heard from the person from the Mary Outreach Support Service that when they have a vacancy for a house where they have young people staying, it's filled within an hour. So there's also an incredible demand that supply is not meeting. And I too agree with Councillor McCarthy that I'm not particularly confident about this being looked at seriously by the Minister for Planning. But I do think that we're seeing it on our doorstep, we're seeing it every day, and it's getting harder and harder for everyone. So I do think that inclusionary zoning and affordable housing is crucial, and that we should be doing everything we can, and the state government should be doing all it can as well.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I have a amendment to the motion which relates to the 2 dot points, which is now on the screen. So I'm moving that as an addition to build in our local needs.
Thank you for that amendment, Councillor Lawrence. I'll get Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Newton to have a read. Councillor Lawrence, is there an extra 2 there that shouldn't be there?
I'm happy to take grammatical changes. The intent there is obviously that we anticipate there may be a 10% statewide mandatory zoning, but our report indicates we need 28%
Okay.
of new development.
Thank you.
So it's sort of like
I think the 10 to 20, it's
asking-
clear. I just,
asking that,
I
that our local needs be considered greater than 10%.
I just wondered whether it should read that can extend any future 10% inclusionary zoning to 28%.
Yeah, up to is the word. The second last word should be up to.
Up to, okay. Is that acceptable to the mover?
Sorry, I just want to understand
okay.
where the up is going. Sorry.
Level up to option B. Wait, B.
I also think there's an extra 2 that shouldn't be there earlier on.
Okay. I think I understand the spirit of it, and I'm happy to support it.
Okay, that's acceptable to the mover and the seconder.
I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. The mover and seconder have accepted that amendment, so that's now the motion in front of us. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I rise to speak. Mayor Rennie, rise to speak in favour of the motion moved by my fellow councillors. The reason Councillor McCarthy has listed our long history on this from the City of Darebin. We surveyed our residents. They would accept high levels of mandated inclusionary zoning. There has been a policy accepted by put forward by a group that I'm a founding member of, Labor for Housing, at a state conference level. We look forward to that actually being considered in a government level. However, the schemes that were in place before austerity and changes in the UK embedded 10% mandatory and then allowed councils to negotiate 20 or 30% on different varying projects. And the reason I'm flagging here that we should be advocating for our own position of up to 28%, because it's the content of the report itself, which indicates some years ago when we first started housing policy, we only needed 100 extra units a year to address chronic shortages. We now require 300 odd units to be added to the city because of the depletion of public housing and social housing, as well as other forms of affordable housing. So it's important that we not just advocate and support a statewide 10%, but also request that projects or whole cities could be considered, like ours, where the community is welcoming, could be considered for higher levels than the 10% if that is eventually put in place. And I also would say, because the City of Darebin is so transport rich, large parts of it, developers will not be put off by higher levels of social housing in the City of Darebin.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried.
Can we have that noted?
Yes, we'll note that that was unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. So that brings us to item 8.11. That's moved by Councillor Messina and seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor
I
Messina.
have an amendment.
Okay, thank you once again, Councillor Lawrence. I'll hear from the mover and the seconder, and then we'll come straight to you for the amendment. Councillor Messina.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation, and I know there's many hours and many briefings that have gone to complete this strategy, and ultimately this strategy is underpinned by 6 actions. 1 is reporting, 2 is removal, 3 is partnerships, prevention, advocacy and internal governance. Graffiti is a form of visual communication. It's essentially it's actually illegal if you have no permission to actually communicate your art on a particular property that is not owned by you. Street art is ugly, and its ugly presence is actually creative artistry for some. However, it is an eyesore for others. And the difference is, did the writer or the graffiti or the creative artistic director actually seek permission? Was permission given to the art form? And if the answer is no, it is actually in fact illegal. Under the Acts of Parliament, if the damage is greater than $5,000, 6 months imprisonment is the penalty. Police have the power to issue infringement notice. I've never actually heard that one's been actually issued. Is it cultural acceptance to put up an ugly presence in our municipality? It's unsettling and chaotic. That's what it creates, making our urban inhabitants feel unsafe in our own neighbourhoods. Graffiti is antisocial behaviour performed in order to gain attention, a form of a thrill-seeking device, giving the rider a tool to make their presence a soapbox perhaps. The aim of the strategy is to minimise the incidence of graffiti both on our public and private property, to establish an effective and economical graffiti removal service to provide a proactive, rapid removal approach. It also is going to underpin perhaps a much needed graffiti tag register, which will allow the identification of the illegal rider to be traced. Police have been preoccupied with much more serious crimes and perhaps what council should be doing, and I know that perhaps the advocacy where we have an underlying outlay, environmental outlay and graffiti-proof materials that are used in multi-unit developments. I also welcome the graffiti tag register, and hopefully working together with the MAV, we can see where some action is undertaking, and perhaps council's role and the police's role in doing that in the future may vary. I'd like to see where where there was going to be much more action. And when you are the owner of a particular property and somebody comes across and vandalises that property,
10 seconds.
it is you that gets to clean it up, especially if it is your own property. And I don't think that's fair and reasonable when somebody's come along and destroyed it, and the tag register, well, I hope will stop that.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor McCarthy.
I'll reserve my right for the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
I'll just speak in favour of the motion.
You didn't have an amendment?
No.
Sorry, I thought...
I was looking at the wrong report.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Lawrence, over to you then.
Look, yes, I'd like to commend the officers for their work in this area. It's been a very difficult area for the City of Darebin for a long time, partly because of we're a city of transition in terms of development, and there's often been long strips of properties that are not occupied. And so the lack of actual occupation we've seen, turn certain buildings around the place, including on St George's Road and Plenty Road, into hives of activity for tagging. However, I think we also are trying to strike the right policy balance, because I personally, as a graduate of Preston Tech, TOP art, think that some street art, some illegal street art, and I can cite some, are actually great works of street art. And the Merry Creek Bell Street Bridge was one example where Vic Roads continued to paint over what was a fantastic mural, actually added to safety and well-being and an aesthetic experience in that bridge, and the grey wall that they kept painting up there didn't. Now, of course, that conflicts with tagging, which is sort of just vandalism, and to me doesn't employ any kind of great artistic merit or create any kind of feeling of safety in the street. So I would still hope that our policy setting, even if there is, works of art created illegally, that we seek to engage with those street artists and to get them to actually help beautify the city, and of course along the train lines and every other place.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy, you reserved your right. Would you like to exercise it?
Look, I will, and I think I take an approach having a background and a current role outside of council working with vulnerable young people. I'm acutely aware that what we see with what is described as graffiti or tagging is actually symptomatic of a lot of other things, one of which is, of course, alienation. If you don't have a voice, the only way you feel like you have a voice is actually to tag or to spray, and that's not something that necessarily we find easy to accept or include, but we need to kind of recognise the social basis of that behaviour. That's also a behaviour that doesn't actually continue on for a very long period of time. And as the report alludes to, it's a transition phase for some young people, and what we aim to do with this approach and what we have done in the city for a long time, I think now, is find ways to engage those vulnerable young people, isolated young people, and find ways to actually skill them up, support them, connect them, and give them opportunities to use what may in fact be their first bit of creative activity and channel that into something that is far more focused on connecting with others. I had the pleasure of being on the other side, on the south side of the city, just a couple of weeks ago at a festival down there, a community festival, and was really pleased to see a great big bit of street art, and immediately recognised the authorship, which was, of course, Hayden Dewar, who is referred to in this report. So it's always lovely when you see the street art that you are familiar with, the colourful murals that are commissioned pieces, sometimes even council funded, actually popping up in other parts of the city. And I would just say that one of the things that we need to understand is that this is not a problem, this is a phenomenon, and it has many faces, and it in fact can be a major economic stimulator if channelled well. Juddy Roller in Benalla basically has brought Benalla
10
back to
seconds.
life through their street art festival. They're the sorts of initiatives that connect people and give young people a voice. And I hope that we can continue to be balanced in
Thank you,
terms
that's
of dealing
time.
with tagging and actually including people.
Thank you. Yes, ordinarily, probably after the person who's reserved, the debate would be finished. But go ahead, Councillor Williams. Sorry.
I just want to say a big thank you to our officers, because I know how much time and effort that gets put in towards graffiti, especially to Tina and Brendan, which have put many, many hours. I just want to also point out that graffiti affects many municipalities, and it's very complex. It's not just a bunch of kids or somebody who wants to go out and tag. It's usually people under the age of 25, and it's usually those who are disadvantaged or are disengaged from school or the community, or they feel that life is come at a point where they just need to do something to feel heard. The report is wonderful because it also mentions that we will try and help residents as much as possible to remove any graffiti that we can. And obviously those that are finding having difficulties, whether it's a financial or physical difficulties in cleaning up the graffiti, that council will obviously give those additional support to those people. I also wanted to say over the years, working with my fellow councillor, Trent McCarthy, that we have come a very long way. When I first came on council, graffiti was a huge issue and there was very little money put in the budget at the time. And I think the first year I was here, we quadrupled it from memory. And what we also did was put in as many murals as we could, but not realising how expensive these murals were. So I thought at the time, I was hoping that we would get several put in. And I remember, I think only 2 years later, that Melbourne Council put in their whole laneway of murals, and it's like, oh, damn, you know, that's what I was hoping to do. But yet they put buckets of money in, and that was exactly what we were trying to do, was put murals around Darebin, so it would be more like a tourist site that people can come to Darebin and see different versions and different murals in Darebin. And I hope that we can continue to do more of these beautiful murals. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'll just check again. Are there any further speakers? No, we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. We can also note that that was unanimous. That brings us to 9, consideration of responses to petitions, notices of motion and general business. There are none. Notices of motion, there are none. Item 11, reports of standing committees. Ms Bishop, can I just refer that to you before we get there?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, we had an administration error where the full document wasn't uploaded, so I will pull that document and retable that at the next council meeting.
Thank you. That therefore brings us to records of assemblies of councillors. That's moved.
Just for clarity, so that audit committee
Has been pulled from the agenda and will be represented. So that does provide an opportunity, Councillor Lawrence, if you have any questions, to get in touch with Ms Bishop because it will come back to us. Can I just...
I'm going to welcome our new chair to the motion.
Great. Okay. Thank you. That opportunity will be there in a fortnight's time. So, records of assemblies of councillors, that's moved by Councillor Surf, seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? That's carried. Reports by Mayor and councillors, that's moved by Councillor Surf, seconded by Councillor McCarthy. All those in favour? Consideration of reports considered confidential. Yes, Councillor Surf.
I'd like to move a motion that we close the meeting to the public as we're considering confidential items.
Thank you. So that's seconded by Councillor Messina. All those in favour? That motion is carried. Thank you to our member of the gallery who stuck with us for the longest. We're now moving into confidential business. See you next time. Great.